Hey, it's Jon Justice, and you guys want to talk about Star Wars? I know I do. It's My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast, and this week on the show, we'll talk a little bit of news. JJ Abrams may be being hired full-time by Disney. What does that mean for Star Wars if it happens? We'll talk about the latest episode of Resistance. I'll give you some of my thoughts. A podcast that I listened to this week that I really enjoyed, that I wanted to share with you because I think you'll like it too. We'll also get into your listener feedback on this week's show. Want to remind you before we get started that My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast, is brought to you by Embark, the soon-to-be-released in ebook and paperback space opera novel written by yours truly, Jon Justice. More details at the end of this week's show. If you're not on the mailing list, which is the best way to find out where to get it, when to get it, and how to pre-order Embark, email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
Oh, Jabba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Oh, Jabba.
It's episode 146, boys and girls. Thank you so much for joining me. I am your host, Jon Justice, from a galaxy far, far away, and this is the My Nerd World of Star Wars podcast. I'm late this week. I know that I'm late this week, and I apologize. It's actually kind of a new week now. Technically, I'm on time, but the last episode got released in the middle of a week, and anyways, I'm a few days late on the podcast. I have been so hard at work on Embark, my space opera novel, that it really has taken up a ton of my time. And I will talk a little bit more about that, as I mentioned at the end of the show. I'm really, really excited about this, and I can't wait to get it out into the world and to share it with everybody. And I am excited for Star Wars fans to read it. And it sounds really weird because I wrote it and I cannot be objective about my own material. I have been getting some feedback, and I'm really excited about the feedback that I've received so far on Embark. And so far, it really has worked and resonated in exactly the way that I was hoping it was going to. And I didn't write it with the intention of making it enjoyable for Star Wars fans, but as a Star Wars fan, it's almost impossible to not see the correlation there. So again, I'll get into more details of it coming up at the end of the show, but I was, even this morning, hard at work, formatting the paperback and getting the ebook part of it ready for its final formatting. I've been working with just some fantastic people, from my wife Melinda, who was in charge of the editorial process of it, to Angela Wallace, who's been doing the proofreading, to Tom Edwards, who did the cover art and made my visions for the vehicles, which essentially are characters in the book come to life. I was sitting down working on it this morning, and I get easily distracted if I've got the TV on or podcasts or music that's got vocals in it. I can listen to soundtracks, though. And I have several soundtrack playlists in my iTunes, and surprisingly, or not so much, not so surprisingly, most of them are dominated with Star Wars soundtracks. And I put the music on this morning, and it was like Soundtracks 1 was the playlist, and it's just filled with just from all the movies. My favorite pieces of Star Wars soundtracks. And it's amazing how Star Wars has that ability to just transport you to another place and just makes you feel good. And listening to that music this morning and working on the project, it just made it for such an enjoyable experience. So, again, I know now I'm talking about Embark and we need to talk about Star Wars, but it's Star Wars related, and I'll get into more of that at the end of the show this week. Let's dive into just a little bit of news. There's not a lot going on. There was some speculation that we could maybe get a title as early as the 1st, which would have been Thursday, and it hasn't happened yet. I am convinced that we'll be getting the title for Episode 9 very, very soon. And I can't help but wonder, and I mentioned it before, and I'll say it again, that we may get another slight teaser like we did for The Force Awakens. I know John Boyega posted on his Instagram page It was a photo of fireworks going off, and it said, like, Star Wars family, ! We've received some confirmation that Oscar Isaac and maybe even Daisy Ridley and John Boyega for sure have all been shooting in Jordan, I believe. And based off their Instagram accounts and their significant others and the individuals who were involved in the movie themselves, the speculation is that the filming has wrapped on that portion of the shoot. And a lot of people have been talking about the schedules for some of the key players and how some individuals over the course of the holidays are going to be very busy. So the conventional wisdom at the moment when it comes to Episode 9 is that we could be heading into a holiday pause, but they may have gotten a majority of the shooting, at least some of the location shooting, finished. So because it's been so quiet on the Star Wars front, I know we're getting a title before the end of the year. And like I said, I wouldn't be too surprised if we got another 88-second teaser to begin to develop the hype. It's interesting, too, because Drew Lee, who hosts the weekly radio show that I do with me, we have a weekly movie podcast. And I'm surprised I haven't talked about it before. I probably should. If you go to the iHeart Radio app and you look for Justice and Drew or TCNT, Twin Cities News Talk, TCNT Movie Talk, we host a weekly 25-minute movie show where we talk about the movies that are coming out in theaters that week, the Blu-ray and DVD releases, and then we get into streaming movies, and then we flash back 10 and 20 years and look at the movies that were released 10 and 20 years ago in the theaters and talk about those. So if you want to check it out and want to hear me talk more about movies even beyond Star Wars, check out TCNT Movie Talk on the iHeart Radio app. It's on iTunes as well. If you search for Justice and Drew, you can find it there. But Drew, who's a Star Wars fan, and he's been on the show several times in the past, he made a comment during this week's Movie Talk, and I didn't even prompt him to say this. I mean, I'm sort of the premier Star Wars fan, but we're all Star Wars fans. I mean, Sam's a new Star Wars fan, only being 23 years old, and Drew's my age, and he likes Star Wars, albeit not as much as I do. But he made the comment that he was itching for new Star Wars, that he'd really gotten accustomed to Star Wars over the holidays with the 3 movie releases that we've received in The Force Awakens, Rogue One, and The Last Jedi, and that it felt weird that we were heading into the holidays and there wasn't a new Star Wars movie. And I agree with him. I think it's going to benefit Episode 9 next year, but we really are in a quiet phase of Star Wars right now. And I'm sure Disney and Lucasfilm are playing this game because they want the hype to start to build, but I hope they don't wait too long, because I'm at a point now where I'm ready to start talking about the next Star Wars. I'm ready to really get into it on the show. I mean, obviously, so many of us do every week, but if you follow the Star Wars podcast, you know as well as I do that shows are really, really thin on content right now when it comes to anything new to talk about, just because of the lack of stuff being released apart from Resistance. I'll take this moment to mention the one show that I did at the start of this week's show, and that is Coffee with Kenobi. It's not a show that I listen to regularly. If they post a title that grabs my attention, if they're talking about something that I really want to hear about, I'll listen to it. I find it, and this is no offense to the guys at Coffee and Kenobi, because they do a fantastic job. I just find it really dry. I like a little bit more energy in my shows. But they've been going through the prequel trilogy, and laying out the things that they like in the prequel trilogy. And the one that they just did, I think last week, was the things that they like about Attack of the Clones. And I really, really enjoyed it. It was a really great discussion with those hosting the show and the guests that they had on Coffee with Kenobi. I would encourage you to go and check it out if you're a fan of the prequels. If you love Attack of the Clones like I do, I would definitely go and give that show, Coffee with Kenobi, where they talk about Attack of the Clones and the things that they enjoyed the most about it, a listen. It was at a time when we're slow on news. It was a fun listen. I would definitely go and check it out. So the only other real news item that I want to touch upon this week is a story that came out of Variety. Several major Hollywood studios are courting JJ Abrams, who was looking to land a lucrative mega deal with a big media company. People familiar with the matter say Abrams' ambitions are vast and that the prolific writer, producer, and director is on the hunt for the kind of super Nova-sized deal that would encompass films, television series, digital content, music, games, consumer products, and theme park opportunities. He is insisting on a certain number of put pictures, an industry term for a specific number of guaranteed slots on a studio's slate of movies. It's the kind of mega deal reserved for Abrams' mentor and friend Steven Spielberg. Okay, so let's just stop here and want to make just a couple of points on this. I really do hope that Disney picks up JJ Abrams. And I really hope that he has a lead role with the future of Star Wars. I think that JJ Abrams is incredibly talented. He makes really good, if not great, movies. And he has that taste that really lends itself to Star Wars. He's not a Rian Johnson. We'll talk about The Last Jedi. Rian Johnson is very good at making movies. He's also very good at making different kinds of movies, and he has a very eclectic taste. And for as much as I love, adore, and think that The Last Jedi is a masterpiece, and for as much as I am looking forward to his trilogy, I do think that Star Wars as a whole would be better served with an individual like a J.J. Abrams guiding the ship than even potentially a Rian Johnson. I have made comments in the past about Rian Johnson maybe serving like a George Lucas role, that Disney needs a new George Lucas to guide its vision. And while I think there are people inside of Lucasfilm already that do a good job of that, Pablo Hidalgo, gatekeeper to all the canon, certainly Dave Filoni being a protege to George Lucas, I see a guy like J.J. Abrams as being a figurehead who can really help guide those singular content creators below him. Because I feel like his talent and his approach and his taste is a lot broader. And he would be very good at sort of developing themes and points to go and hint at and craft to create an overarching story. And again, don't get me wrong, he is an incredibly talented director, but I think he's very accessible. I'm trying to think of the right word to use. He's just accessible. Rian Johnson's a bit quirky, and I just think that Disney would be better served with somebody who has a little bit broader of a palette of which he paints on. Now, look, this had nothing to do with Star Wars, so I'm not going to spend much more time than I already have on it. This could be, J.J. Abrams wanting to do a lot of different things, maybe create new things, maybe make a movie out of a brand new book that's coming out soon. That's a space opera called Embark. How fantastic would that be? Look, this could be something well beyond Star Wars. But I would be thrilled to see J.J. Abrams move into a leadership role with Disney in helping guiding Star Wars moving forward. And we'll see what ends up coming of this. The only other point I want to make about this particular news item is I do find it interesting that he feels like, if this is true, and I'm reading a lot into this, don't misunderstand, but JJ Abrams obviously feels like he's negotiating from a position of power, and why wouldn't you with the track record of success that he's had? But since we're in the middle of directing and creating episode 9, the fact that this news is coming out now, and if negotiations are going on now, I imagine it's because there's a level of confidence that J.J. Abrams has in what they've written and are creating for episode 9. And again, I could just be looking at the brightest of bright sides here and reading into it, but when I read the story, that was one of the first things that popped up. I was like, man, did this guy's trying to negotiate a mega deal? He probably is pretty confident in what it is that they're creating with episode 9, and I don't have any doubt about that. It's going to be a fantastic movie. I don't even need to see the trailer to know that. Star Wars is way too precious of a thing to too many millions of people for them to go and mess up episode 9, and they certainly haven't done that with episodes 7 and 8, in my humble opinion.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
We will talk a little bit more Last Jedi. Watched it again recently, no big surprise there. And a couple of the listener feedback emails that I want to share with you this week are focusing on The Last Jedi. So we'll kind of reserve our Last Jedi talk for when we get into the listener feedback this week. I do want to talk briefly about Resistance. As I mentioned on last week's show, had to wait the 3 or 4 weeks until they aired all the first 3 episodes. It was essentially 4 because the first episode was a 2-parter that then you could download, and it's a full hour. So the latest new episode, which was the first, again, new one that I'd seen since they released it, I think it was called The High Tower. Watched that this week. Look, I really enjoy Resistance. I do think it's a fun show. It is definitely a kid's show. I'm watching it with my 11-year-old, and he really likes it. My wife, Melinda, isn't interested in watching it at all, and she's a big Star Wars fan, but there's varying degrees, right? She's kind of tapped out on it. She's like, nah, not really for me. I love the animation in Star Wars Resistance. I love seeing the First Order. That red First Order pilot, I can't remember his name. I want an action figure of that so bad. But when it comes to the storytelling element of the show, it's not really grabbing my attention. I'll continue to watch them. I don't think that there'll be repeat viewings for me unless they're particular episodes that I happen to really like. The shows are good, but it clearly lacks, for this Star Wars fan, the depth of the mythology and expanding upon what we already know beyond spending time with the First Order. I mean, it's great seeing Phasma, and I'm looking forward to seeing Kylo Ren, and I love seeing the First Order troopers. I think that's all really cool, but just the story in and of itself happening on this platform, so far away from all of the, all of the universe that we've been spending all this time in. I find it a little bit lacking. So it's great family fun. Again, enjoying watching it with my son. But I do ultimately like Rebels and the Clone Wars when it comes to the animated content a lot better. But I also know that show's not really geared for me. It is geared for kids. And if it's geared for kids, it's doing a fantastic job. Because it kind of hits that nice little sweet spot, I think. It's like almost enough to make me really be a fan, but still geared just young enough to keep the younger kids happy. So I'm looking forward to more of the episodes, but certainly not looking forward to it in the same way that I did the Rebels series. I actually went through, I got was it season 4? Let me look, is that right? Season 4, yeah, season 4. Season 4 on Blu-ray. Went back and watched it, and I think I talked about that last week. Cried at the end. God, the end of it's so emotional. Boy, the end of Rebels. Some of the best animated Star Wars, hands down. The final episode of the Rebels season in season 4 and the whole thing was fantastic and really was on par with the final episode of the Clone Wars. And I'm looking forward to Clone Wars coming back next year too. All right, let's go ahead and move on.
When I found you, I saw raw, untamed power. And beyond that, something truly special.
All right, let's get right into listener feedback this week. Not a ton of listener feedback. It's been a little quieter, but then again, the Star Wars news has been a little thin as of late. But we do have some listeners that have reached out over the course of the past week or so. We'll share these emails and YouTube comments with you. First one comes from a friend of the show, Jennifer Oliver, who says, I hope JJ writes and directs in a vacuum, not paying attention to to the current Star Wars environment. Just make art like Rian Johnson did. All will be all right if he does. Now, she goes on to write, definitely agreed about Kira being self-sacrificing. I love her strength and Rey's and Leia's, but she takes the cake on the self-sacrifice. Yeah, and I absolutely agree. And I'm not going to go down that road again when it comes to Solo, but Solo is definitely a movie that I appreciate more and more and more the more that I see it. I really, really am coming to love that movie. It's a different Star Wars. And I really wish that Bob Iger would have let Lucasfilm release it in December. I think that would have been perfect for Solo. I know that there was a desire to keep some distance when it comes to the Nutcracker and the Four Realms, but it's getting horrible reviews right now. I know there was a desire to clear the way when it comes to Mary Poppins, but I personally believe that both those movies could exist in the same box office universe. It really, really is unfortunate that Solo got released when it did. I think it would have been much better served had they done it in December, but they didn't. We all own it now, which is fine because I can watch it whenever I want. To Jennifer's first point about JJ Abrams, watching The Last Jedi actually makes me appreciate The Force Awakens even more. Last Jedi is definitely different. There's no doubt about that. It is a piece of art, in my opinion. I wouldn't look at The Force Awakens as a piece of art. I would just look at The Force Awakens as being a really great Star Wars movie. But going back and spending time with The Force Awakens, now that I've spent a lot of time with The Last Jedi, I've really come to appreciate it even more, and I adore that movie. That was not an easy task for JJ Abrams to have to pull off when he made that movie. And you watch it, and it really shines from the standpoint of he had a tall order to fill and absolutely nailed it. JJ's got a much different artistic flair. As I mentioned before, it's a little bit more accessible, a little bit more poppy, right? Certainly didn't have the controversy and the division that The Last Jedi did, but just going back and watching that movie and how incredibly rewatchable The Force Awakens is, I really have come to appreciate it even more. And it gets me even more excited for Episode 9, to be quite honest with you. JJ Abrams kind of free from having to worry about reestablishing the Star Wars brand gets me super, super excited for what he might be able to, to go and accomplish. So if you haven't watched The Force Awakens in a while, if you've been spending time, watching The Last Jedi, go watch The Force Awakens again. And it certainly makes a difference knowing where the story is heading, knowing the next day all this other stuff goes down. But it is always surprising to me how, for this fan, how the Star Wars movies just continue to grow. My appreciation of them on so many different levels just changes upon different viewings, and they're just fun to watch. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. That's a long way for me to go and say the Star Wars movies are just simply, fun to watch. All right, let's go and read from Amparo Rivera, who writes this. While watching a movie the other day, I remembered a comment you made regarding The Last Jedi and how people in the future will see this very differently from now. The movie I was watching was The Thing from the 1980s with Kurt Russell. Fantastic movie. Great Halloween film, by the way. Remember that one? Absolutely do. I own it. It's a great movie. It had been a long time since I watched this movie, and very funny that many years later I saw it with different eyes. At that time, I liked it very much, but now I saw a real masterpiece that it actually is. From the chilling music, the cinematography, the pacing of the movie, and the actors. Even the dog gave a magnificent performance. 20 years from now, I'm sure a similar comment will be made regarding The Last Jedi. Many blessings to you and your family, A. Rivera. The Thing is a really good movie. Side note, not Star Wars related, but interesting when it comes to The Thing. The remake that they did several years ago, they had attempted to reproduce all the practical effects. They wanted to make the horror of the movie match because it was a prequel to the 1980s thing. And apparently the studio, once they were done, said, nope, we're not going to let you do it. After they'd done all this practical special effects work, they made them go and replace a bunch of stuff with CGI. And it's disappointing because I really would have rather have seen, to be honest, the practical effect work that they did, because I thought the CGI in the movie was not very good. But you're absolutely right. The Thing is a fantastic movie, and it holds up really well. And Star Wars is a really, really good example of those movies that are definitely a product of those times, but still stand the test of time. And for those that give the special editions a hard time, you know what? I'll be honest with you, and I have been. I always am. I'll always prefer the special editions over the original. The original had groundbreaking special effects, but there's no way they would hold up by today's standards. And I do think that the special edition bridges that gap and keeps those movies a little bit more contemporary, especially when watching them against the sequel trilogy and the prequel trilogy. Side note, and something that A. Rivera made me think about. I was watching Independence Day Resurgence. That's the sequel. Not a good movie. Fun movie. I enjoy watching it. It's a good alien invasion movie. But we were watching it the other day. I tossed it in. And for whatever reason, me, my wife, and my 16-year-old ended up all watching it together. It was kind of funny. Very surprising that happened. But we were watching it. And I was reminded of the prequels, because if you remember, it was like the 1990s, 90, right? 91, when the first Independence Day came out, and the special effects, we weren't quite to CGI yet. And there was a lot of practical effects in Independence Day, and they still hold up when you go to watch it. When you watch Resurgence, it is a CG fest. And I couldn't help but think about how there was a correlation between the original Independence Day and the original Star Wars movies and the prequels. Sort of the director didn't have access to all the tools to do everything he wanted to in his original movie, but when he got to the sequel, he certainly did, and it wasn't like it necessarily benefited Resurgence all that much. As a matter of fact, I think it hindered it a little bit. Sometimes those practical effects are a better way to go. I love the way that they're dealing with the movies now. I love the fact that they are definitely doing a little bit of both. And I know they did it with the prequels too. So don't hammer me with the, The Force Awakens had more special effects, more CGI effects than the entire prequel trilogy did. I know, I've seen all the stats and the data. That being said, the CGI work in the prequels isn't nearly as good as the CGI work is now, and it shows a lot more in the prequels. And these are movies that I love, so don't give me too hard of a time. All right, last listener feedback this week. It's a long one. I'm going to hit the highlights, but I do appreciate that Bonnie Fisher wrote as much as she did, and I have read through all of it, but for the sake of the show and time, again, we'll just kind of hit the finer points of what she had to say and talk a little Last Jedi. Well, even for a no Star Wars week, I still enjoyed your Star Wars musing. Oh, thank you, Bonnie. I wish that Solo was released in Christmas 2018 as well. During listener feedback, you got 2 Kylo tidbits. Too bad Kylo did not make it into Wreck-It Ralph 2 along those lines. Yeah, I'm not bummed that Kylo didn't make it into Wreck-It Ralph 2. I was just surprised that I thought it was interesting that they said that Kylo Ren was off limits when it came to that movie. And this is what Bonnie gets into in her email. I think Disney is also steering us in a certain direction with how they are marketing a Kylo Ren since The Last Jedi. I came up with most of this after I listened to a podcast from Star Wars Connection when they mentioned a Rey Valentine heart in 2018. I started to think about where was Kylo on the Valentine's candy. Could Disney be marketing Kylo differently by removing him from the dark side merchandise so we, the audience, don't think about Kylo as an evil bad guy of episode 8 and 9? And she basically runs through a bullet point list of 15 different items. Lack of Kylo used on Valentine's and Easter candy for 2018. 2018 had Bounty paper towel napkins with the Falcon, TIE fighters, and lightsabers, the packaging stuck to using faces of the Resistance. Star Wars Ziploc bags on the shelf right now, TFA images. Kylo is on a sandwich bag, but it is an image from The Force Awakens. And she goes on and on and on and on and on. Really good, comprehensive list. And she wraps up on this. And she says, I feel a redemption coming on with an alive Ben Solo as the credits roll. Because if Kylo/Ben dies, what's the point? Han's death would mean nothing, and Luke's death will not have the same impact. Most importantly, Ben Solo's story will be sadder than Anakin, since so far, Ben did not even get to kiss the girl, hold the girl, marry the girl, or have a couple of kids. These next 400 plus days are going to creep. Have a great week, Bonnie Fisher. How do I want to word this? It is interesting. I want to know if they actually do that. Right? I think Bonnie puts up a very compelling case as to how they've marketed Kylo Ren. And I certainly agree that everything that Bonnie laid out in her email and what we know lends itself to, they definitely appear to be putting Kylo Ren out into the public outside the movies in a particular way. Again, we know that he's been off limits and they're not supposed to mess with him. It really comes down to, did they map out a total arc? Was the idea always to have a Ben redemption? And if that is the case, then yeah, I would imagine that they've been very, very careful in the marketing plans. I would be very curious to know whether or not they actually think that much into it. I just don't know. Working in the entertainment industry, I can tell you that, a lot of times people make some real bold assumptions on how things are done, and it's just so far removed from the truth that it's not even funny. So I just don't know. I really don't. I think Bonnie makes a good case. I've listened to a lot of podcasts focusing on Kylo Ren and Ben and Ben Solo and his redemption. I am also of that opinion. I don't care what they do. I just can't wait to see episode 9. I trust their judgment. But that being said, I do tend to agree with the thought that to not have him redeemed really undermines even Han's sacrifice as well. So we'll all find out in a little bit over a year from now. But thank you so much, Bonnie, for taking time out and for writing that. I do appreciate it. And just want to talk about The Last Jedi again real quick. Watched it last weekend. Really wanted to watch it this weekend. I swear, if it wasn't for the fact that I was married and had children and I didn't want to get the eye roll from the family, I would probably watch it more often, which seems really, really silly. But, when you've got movies you haven't seen yet, it's hard because I want to watch The Last Jedi again, but I haven't seen this movie and I haven't seen that movie. Anyway, sat down, watched The Last Jedi again the other day, and that movie, I can't come on this show enough and praise that movie, I guess, enough. It is just such a special piece of cinema. And after almost a year now of spending hours upon hours with this movie, there is no portion of the film now that I want to skip. There just isn't. When I was seeing in the theaters, usually I would reserve the meeting of a DJ as the moment to go use the restroom. But even now, when I watch it at home, I find it very difficult to miss any portion of the movie. I hope that Rian Johnson can live up to the hype in my mind with whatever his trilogy is going to be, because he knocked it out of the park with The Last Jedi. And that is clear when you look at the backlash. And that's where I've landed on that, by the way. All the ridiculous clickbaity videos trashing that movie and talking about how it ruined the franchise. To me, that just goes to show how powerful that movie is. Because a movie that doesn't evoke an emotion in you, right? It's going to have highs and lows. I mean, I think, Force Awakens kind of universally liked, made a ton of money, but at least in my opinion, no one's looking at The Force Awakens going, that's a masterpiece, a piece of art. People do that with The Last Jedi. I do that with The Last Jedi. And the fact that there was so much negativity, I think, really reinforces it for those that love that movie. Because you get that reaction. So that's all I want to talk about The Last Jedi this week. I just love that movie. I just think it's fantastic, and when I talk about it, it makes me want to go and watch it again. All right, I do want to talk a little bit about Embark and the process that I've been going through, but we'll do it this way. We'll go ahead and do an official wrap-up to the Star Wars show this week. A little bit shorter than normal, but again, it's been a slow news week, and I've been hard at work again on the book and getting it ready for release, and hopefully we've got a title to talk about soon. Hopefully in the next few weeks we've got maybe some footage or a photo or just something to grab onto and to discuss. The last thing that I'll mention before I close the show out and then I talk a bit about the book. The other bit of news item that came out this week, and it just popped into my head, I forgot about it earlier, is that the Game of Thrones, the Benioff and Weiss guys, Benioff and Weiss guys, that's funny. There was a report that came out this week that said their next project, once they're done with Game of Thrones, which the final season airs next year, they're immediately going to work on the Star Wars series. Many people are speculating that means that their movies are coming first before Rian Johnson's. I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I think Rian Johnson has actually had some time to write. Right now, he's in the middle of filming a movie with the guy from James Bond, Daniel Craig, called Knives Out, kind of a film noir, crime noir story. To me, he'll be done filming that and have it wrapped up probably before the Benioff and Weiss guys from Game of Thrones will. So, I don't know. Conventional wisdom will tell you we've heard more about the Game of Thrones series than we have Rian Johnson's, which would sort of lend itself to thinking that it's coming out. Their movies are coming out before Rian Johnson's are. I think we'll know for sure come next April and Star Wars Celebration. But that was the other news item, is that as it relates to Star Wars. But as soon as those guys were done with Game of Thrones, they were going to start writing the Star Wars movies. So, all right. We'll wrap the show up. Thank you so much for taking time out. Really do appreciate it. I'll talk a little bit about Embark coming up after the break. But remember, you can find My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast, on Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, iHeartRadio app. MyNerdWorld.net is back up and running. If you go to MyNerdWorld.net, it is focused on the book, but there is a link to the podcast there. So we're going to be using that a little bit more often with this show, with the other podcasts that I do, and certainly with the book. So if you want to go and check it out, mynerdworld.net, you can go there now. Talk to you again next week. Thank you so much for hanging out. Stay tuned for after the outro, and I'll talk a little bit about Embark if you want to stick around. But thank you so much for checking out the show this week. And may the Force be with you. But I'll let Obi-Wan Kenobi, because he does it better than I do, say it.
The Force will be with you. Always.
My Nerd World.
All right, for those that have hung out after the show, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to hear me talk about my book. Embark is the first of what will be, at a bare minimum, a trilogy. I hope to have the second story and book out next year. The plan as it is right now is within a few weeks, Embark will be available on ebook and on paperback. If you are not on the mailing list, as I mentioned at the start of the show, talkshownerd@gmail.com. That will get you and give you the opportunity to find out when it specifically is going to be released and how you can pre-order it if you desire. There will be an audiobook. The audiobook will probably not be available until next year. There's a slight chance I might be able to get it out before Christmas, but at this point in time, my plan is to release the book, have it here for the holidays, and then do a relaunch after the first of the year. And with the relaunch, I'll be releasing the audiobook as well. For those that aren't familiar, maybe this is the first time that you've heard me talk about this. I had an idea for a story going on about 3 years ago. And before coming here to Minneapolis, Minnesota, I had basically sort of did a rough outline of the story that I wanted to tell. The story in and of itself was designed to be, and it is, a space opera. Knowing full well that George Lucas, as I've said many times, kind of ruined it for all storytellers by creating this fantasy universe in another part of the galaxy far, far away, which really afforded him the opportunity to open up and do something fresh and new. And in my opinion, anybody that kind of goes down that road is just compared to Star Wars. I wanted to do something grounded in reality, but still had an epic space feel, and that's what Embark is. It's a space opera adventure about humanity's future and a group of friends and a guy who loves a girl, and I'm really excited to share all of these characters with you. The book itself is a bit of an tribute to all the things that I love about movies, right? And writing is arguably the thing that I've always been the worst at, so I thought, why not challenge myself? And if it wasn't for the people around me who have helped me out, if it wasn't for my wife and her amazing editing skills, and Angela, who's done the proofreading on the book, there's no way I would have been able to get it to the place where I got it. I'm very pleased to say that so far I've had some amazing feedback from a few of the beta readers, and I hope that I'll continue to get that great feedback while I sort of close out the process of getting the book ready and available to the public. I can't wait for you to hopefully read it, and I hope that you will, again, like this show, enjoy reading it as much as I did creating it. It's incredibly special to me. I love these characters. Really looking forward to telling these stories in the coming years, and I hope that again, I really hope it resonates with Star Wars fans. It's not Star Wars. It's got a lot of different elements of things in my life that I love. I know there's some people that have read it. And as a matter of fact, I'll read you one comment. One of my beta readers wrote, "I enjoyed how natural the transition was from a normal story set in the near future to a full-blown space opera. I see and love the influence of other stories like Star Wars and Star Trek from Star Trek on the story without it being a copycat. And this was probably one of the greatest compliments I could have gotten. First off, the book is amazing." So again, it will be available in the next few weeks. I am going to make it available for pre-order to those on the mailing list. talkshownerd@gmail.com. That is the email. Email me. I'll throw you on the list. And this is probably your last opportunity. Not that I won't add people to the list later, but I'm planning on getting the first email blast out here in just a few days. So drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, and I will add you to the list, and you'll be the first one to know how to pick up Embark. And I can't wait to get it out there for everybody to read. And at a time when we do not have a Star Wars movie to go watch in theaters, I present to you this year's epic space adventure called Embark. And I really hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks so much for taking a little bit of time out to hear me rattle on about it. And I will talk to you again next week. Bye.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?